English translation 927th contact Sunday, February 22nd, 2026, 1:32 hours.
Here we are. Greetings in the early morning, Edward.
Greetings also to you, dear friend.
I am still a little tired, but I am awake as usual, because I just cannot sleep and I have so many thoughts running through my head. I am simply preoccupied with world events that cannot be changed because the majority of Earth humans are unfortunately incorrigible, and allow all the negativity to rage within them instead of peace, freedom, and righteousness. That you are both welcome in my den, although I cannot really say good morning, as you have surely been up for a long time. But you are truly welcome.
We really have been up for a long time, as you say. And now I want to copy down what the committee has asked you to record in writing, which I will then forward to them immediately, and they will process it quickly and still today, so you will probably have it back in your hands this afternoon.
Good. Bernadette has already pre-corrected it for me, and I have also included what you dictated to me from the Committee for the Statutes and Regulations regarding the 10.
That's fine, and the committee will see that we are reproducing exactly what they asked me to do. But now, I want to photocopy the whole thing and immediately. So, that's done, and Angina has just confirmed that she and Florina have received my transmission and will forward it to the committee immediately.
That was quick, but it is good when everything is done quickly. When I think about how complicated everything is made here on Earth, there is no comparison. So that's good. Then I can give it back to Bernadette so she can process it and send it to the correction team. I will then include the whole thing here in the report.
That will be good, because I think your words are very valuable and correspond to what the committee wants and has asked you to write the whole thing according to your understanding and in your own words.
Pre-corrected by Bernadette and corrected by Andreas, Christian, and Daniela, then corrected by the committee and found to be correct, but with additions, returned about 17 hours later.
What FIGU, the Free Interest Group Universal, stands for.
A. FIGU, Free Interest Group Universal, is an association that values comprehensive and far-reaching learning about genuine and true humanity, also the worldwide pursuit of true peace in the absence of war, the general peacefulness of all peoples, and the protection of all human and human-like life in accordance with the entire creation life, and thus also the life of nature, and generally the entire fauna and flora. B. Personality. True personality corresponds to an ethical attitude based on self-education and respect for all life, and thus also clearly on the way of thinking that statements, opinions, speeches, and judgments of every human being can be correct or wrong and can therefore be discussed, but peacefully and without strife or hatred. However, the religious or secular beliefs of every human being are fundamentally respected, are indisputable, and deeply rooted in character and personality, and therefore can only be changed through self-education, which involves personal, changeable, and uninfluenced thought work and character building. Actions towards the environment based on true humanity are founded on balanced, steadfast goals, which must always be expressed towards fellow human beings through an honest attitude and disposition. These very profound objectives are given in the values of dignity and honor towards the creation, which in all its existence is the universe-wide nature and in no way corresponds to an imaginary god or any non-existent gods or other supposedly higher beings. And all these values, which are to be applied to the creation nature, also apply as bonuses for fellow human beings, humans, and all human-like beings, also for the whole of nature and its fauna and flora, whereby these values should be conveyed in forms that are based on the following values. True humanity requires an honest attitude towards women, children, and men, regardless of age, faith, skin color, and race, profession, personal legal status, and social form. And it is also absolutely irrelevant what sexual orientation, nationality, and marital status a human being has. All life, that is to say, every human being, human-like being, humanoid being, nature and all fauna and flora and everything else that exists, should be treated by true human beings with absolutely positive qualities and abilities. This should be done regardless of origin or gender, as it should be the foundation for solidarity, which creates trust and security, as well as fundamental mindfulness for everything and everyone. Personal humanity is the positive attitude that also protects dignity in all life and its high values, thereby also cultivating morality and ethics in a good way. True humanity in dealing with fellow human beings involves absolute responsibility and a specific application of humanism, as well as charity, empathy, tolerance, helpfulness, forgiveness, compassion, consideration, tolerance, and respect, kindness, openness, wholeness, and love, commitment, but also the recognition and acceptance of one's own shortcomings and the effort to remedy them. Applied goodness and daily compassion, responsibility, courage, valuable actions, absolute reliability in words and deeds, but also cultivating kindness and goodwill, empathizing with others and actively listening to them, maintaining dignity and honor, making correct decisions, dealing with conflicts constructively, maintaining commitment, and accepting fallibility and imperfection. True personal personality is characterized by a fully conscious, ethical attitude towards oneself and is very important in interpersonal relationships. This includes self-taught character traits and values that are controlled by one's character, such as empathy, respect, helpfulness, and tolerance in dealing with fellow human beings. The whole thing is based on the acceptance of responsibility and thus goes far beyond simply being nice and creates a bond with fellow human beings. This is truly the value through which a conscious, clear, and honest ethical attitude is created, through which effective interpersonal relationships can be shaped. Personal true humanity towards all fellow human beings includes peacefulness, respect, friendliness, and compassion, etc., towards fellow human beings. It is the quality that connects all human beings, regardless of their origin, religion, or culture, etc. See protection of life. The protection of life is an obligation of the FIGU Association and encompasses absolutely the entire creation, which is the sublime, immeasurable nature of the seven universes, their material belt /C, O, S, M, S, in the entirety of their existence, everything that exists in the realm of their entire sevenfold existence. D. The protection of all life is an absolutely natural fundamental right given to all living beings by the creation, meaning that fundamentally every life should be protected from violence and killing in every way possible. Also not through azartung degeneration caused by criminal legislation, willfulness, revenge, retaliation, hatred, strife, etc. Every life of every species and type is therefore absolutely protected from harm in terms of the body, consciousness, and subconsciousness, and consequently preserved in every form in its integrity. Every life must be protected and must not be vulnerable to attack in any way whatsoever. Protection must therefore be classified and absolutely guaranteed for all life forms, so that all creatures endowed with physical conscious awareness and subconsciousness are protected, as are all life forms of all species and types with impulse consciousness, instinctive consciousness, sensory consciousness, emotional consciousness, perceptive consciousness, and also those that are equipped only with sensory consciousness, regardless of their viability or state of health. E. The protection of life, which specifically applies only to all human beings. Human-like beings and humanoids is a fundamental right and is based on the fact that they possess a physical and evolution-capable consciousness and subconsciousness, whereby they are able to develop higher in every way and completely consciously throughout their lifetime, as this is comprehensively determined and given by creational nature. It is also given by the creation and nature that all protection of food for the human being's existence is naturally and constantly available, but that human beings deliberately develop themselves further through their own initiative, effort, and use of their own thoughts, becoming clearly aware of conscious life and thus of their conscious evolution. Through this, the human being also fully recognizes that it is a being endowed with conscious awareness and subconsciousness, just as this is also inherent in all human beings and human-like beings, for whom all protection of life currently applies in full to the same extent as a fundamental right. Protection of life also encompasses all fauna and flora as an absolute fundamental right, which is determined by creational natural law. Therefore, in any case, the right to life is also a fundamental right for fauna and flora, which means that it must be protected by law and must not be killed, injured, or otherwise impaired, harmed, damaged, hindered in its habitat, or exterminated in any way through negligence, willfulness, malice, recklessness, greed, or arrogance, etc. Thus, the protection of all life also extends to the entire realm of nature and its fauna and flora, and equally to their entire habitat in accordance with the laws of their wild life. Everything is clearly determined according to its use, whereby arbitrary, destructive, and exterminating interventions and machinations belong in the realm of the impermissible. Unfortunately, due to their lack of understanding of nature, human beings have often regulated or misregulated everything in it, causing the fauna and flora to become worn out and thus greatly impairing or even partially exterminating all wildlife. Unfortunately, it must be said that the majority of humanity behaves in a way that is contrary to nature and practices overexploitation of the planet, nature, and its entire fauna and flora. G. The law of protection, which must be explained repeatedly, is considered a principle for all human-like, and human-similar life of every genus and species, which must be protected under all circumstances, without distinction based on worthiness of life, gender, or sexual orientation. And this applies, as clearly stated, to all human-like, and human-similar Wesen, whether they are healthy, wounded, sick, civilians, criminals, or other persons. Specific existing laws of creation nature guarantee human beings, human-like beings and human-like creatures, as well as the entire planet, all-encompassing nature and its fauna and flora, the safety and fundamental protection of life. This protection applies not only to life, but also to the personal freedom of human beings, human-like and human-equivalent beings, as well as to children, adolescents, women and men, and to every human being in general, nature, and as a whole, fauna and flora. Protection also applies to human beings in relation to vulnerable groups, such as criminals, religious groups, sects, organizations, and other vulnerable occurrences, or vulnerable and sensitive individuals, as well as those with physical, psychological, religious, or social impairments, etc. Peacemaking. If the human being wants to create personal peace and peace in the outside world, they must begin with themselves and, in all honesty, clear away, reject, and destroy everything in their character that burdens them also in the slightest way with regard to any kind of aggression. If human beings want peace, it is inevitably necessary for them to transform the state of their character through their own ways of thinking and mental efforts by means of self-education. However, this must be done by bringing inner unrest and dissatisfaction to a standstill and eliminating them completely, which alone will create a state of inner peace. Only then can inner peace be formed, which can also be experienced. However, this effectively depends on how human beings deal with their thoughts in a wise way and thus educate themselves to form the value of their character, which is responsible for this and stores the attitudes of the human beings within themselves and releases them to the outside world according to their formation, in accordance with the situation that then arises. This means that it is necessary for human beings to think positively so that they do not have negative thoughts and manage not to respond to them, because only in this way can they maintain their inner peace. And only when the human being strives mentally for the balanced and peaceful formation of their character, by keeping away from all enemies of peace, will they be able to create inner peace. The enemies of peace dwell within human beings themselves and are rooted in all their negative attitudes as negative values that are afflicted by irresponsibility and the specific application of evil anti-humanism. These must be eliminated and freed from all thought, as must ambition, greed, excessive pride, hatred of one's neighbor, antipathy, irresponsibility, also avarice and favoritism, closed-mindedness, anger and rage, inactivity, hatred, unkindness, irreconcilability, disconnection, intolerance, neglect of rights and duties, inactivity, unforgiveness, also greed for wealth, recklessness, disrespect and restlessness, dogmatism, conflict creation, know-it-all behavior and criticism, as well as social neglect, etc., in order to be truly free. If human beings learn to deal with conflicts in a nonviolent and constructive manner and to strive for positive values, thereby bringing about positive change, then private conflicts will also be resolved peacefully, and no violent methods will be used to deal with the conflicts in an undiplomatic and inhumane manner. However, if for whatever reason insensitive words are spoken carelessly and possibly hurtful criticism is used, thereby disregarding the respect and appreciation of one's fellow human beings, or perhaps even violent physical attacks occur, then this corresponds to angry, self-destructive behavior and unparalleled unrest. The human being's feelings, emotions, and ultimately the mind arise from their positive and negative thoughts, and instead of losing their temper when these arise negatively, they should communicate them to their neighbor in a calm, honest, and peaceful manner, and thereby seek safe ways to counteract any anger that may arise. This is in order to work peacefully towards a solution to the problem, so that at least the principle of peaceful coexistence can emerge. However, the rule is that the immature human being shamefully disregards the mutual respect for the completely personal sovereignty and integrity of his neighbors, deeply hurts them, and engages in mutual verbal or even physical violent attack, thereby making peaceful coexistence absolutely impossible. In addition, there may be lowly intelligent interference by third parties in the matter, making a peaceful solution and coexistence absolutely impossible. Inner peace in human beings is based on a deep state of absolute calm with regard to personal thinking and thus on balanced feelings and emotions, as well as on a peaceful mind, also on the acceptance of one's neighbor and on personal satisfaction, which must be absolutely ingrained in one's character. Overall, this means that the human being must not only be in harmony with themselves, but also with the world around them. This is in no way about facing and overcoming any challenges or difficulties, but rather about simply accepting them and mastering them with serenity, understanding, and reason in a calm manner. Personal and generally effective true peace begins first and foremost with oneself, then with one's own family, relatives, and friends, as well as neighbors and acquaintances. Then comes interaction with society, with which one should live in peace. As a true human being, however, everyone also has an obligation to always maintain the effort to bring about peace in a completely normal way, verbally, to the outside world and in the world, and to do so consistently, solely through one's own peaceful behavior and, if desired, with explanations and words. Life and peace can only exist on earth and among all peoples if peaceful, truly responsible-minded people take the lead for the people, the planet, nature, fauna, and flora, and not those who are power-hungry, obsessed with power, self-important, domineering, or uneducated about the life of nature and its fauna and flora, which together are the most important factors of all life on Earth. All of the irresponsible and absolutely incompetent people of this mindset destroy the conditions that would effectively bring true peace to their own country and to every single human being within it. If these self-aggrandizing, irresponsible people who preside over the nations as madly power-hungry individuals did not harass them with laws, rules, regulations, and statutes, etc., and deprive them of their personal freedom, then there would also be an absence of bloody and violent uprisings, conflicts, and wars, as have been commonplace since time immemorial, due to the presence and actions of irresponsible individuals who are placed in positions of leadership over the people, often elected by the bean-straw stupidity of the majority of the people themselves. There is no peace in the world. There is no harmony, only roaring nonsense and pathological deformation of the peoples with regard to effective true peace, which denies the individual human being and all peoples every life and existence in lasting security, effective freedom, and justice, which should be made possible both on a personal and on a state level. In truth, the Earth human can only distinguish between the mere doubtful and always uncertain absence and occurrence of war, which is basically nothing more than a state of negative peace, which is truly nothing more than a situation of hope that can be ruined at any time by some misguided, power-hungry, and ruling people. This corresponds to a state of constantly uncertain differences between states, which unpredictably confront each other with G-vault on the basis of injustice, self-made law and justice according to their own opinion, well-being and will, etc. Consequently, for them, peace, whether negative or real, is merely a development of their inextricably linked illogicality and their idiotic self-importance and airs of power, or rather their vain, arrogant, and capricious behavior. Power-hungry individuals who abuse and exaggerate their position of power and who behave in a derogatory manner. These elements, who call themselves leaders, use their power to arrogantly dominate their people and human beings. All the fallible elements of this kind who indulge in their evil dispositions have an exaggerated self-image and feel superior to others, consequently also acting snobbishly towards their fellow human beings. In addition, their profession is one of acute, capricious leadership of the people, as their self-aggrandizing decisions are unpredictable, fickle, and based on personal vanity. On the whole, they use far exaggerated means of power to assert their own interests against the interests of others. Their general demeanor corresponds to typical arrogant behavior, whereby they are completely deluded into believing that they are entitled to special, exalted treatment, especially in their dealings with normal human beings. But what effective peace really means for human beings is the knowledge and a noble feeling of absolute security in every respect and form, without the supposed protection of a murderous organization called the Army, which on the one hand constantly requires vast amounts of funding, but which, on the other hand, in the event of war, murders human beings without hesitation, without conscience, and without mercy, spreading endless misery and suffering, also destroying valuable human achievements. This, while the unscrupulous warmongering instigators of wars sit twiddling their thumbs in absolute safety, far away from the skirmishes, murder, and destruction, enjoying themselves unpunished while their soldiers murder, rape, and destroy for their murderous organization, only to ultimately bite the dust themselves. For human beings, peace also means having complete freedom of opinion and acting in a correct and proper manner, where nothing goes wrong or is unreal. And this is not achieved through false and harmful laws that have a negative and even deadly effect on the safety of human beings, nature, and its fauna and flora. For human beings, peace also means respect in their dealings with their fellow human beings, nature and its fauna and flora as a whole, as well as a life without fear, hatred, conflict, and war, but with personal inner peace, joy of life, security, and the certainty of belonging together with all human beings, the planet, the creation, and the entire existence of nature and its fauna and flora. Semyon's Silver Star Center, the 21st of February 2026, 1846 HRS, Billy.
Yes, I did. But because everything here on Earth, also negotiations, is dragged out for ages and is correct dragged out, such as those relating to the war negotiations for an alleged peace in Ukraine, everything is simply being delayed so that the war can continue. This is on the one hand because on the other hand, only malicious propaganda against Putin and Russia is being spread, while Zelensky and Ukraine, probably the most corrupt country in the world, are being sanctified, so to speak. This is not noticed by the lowly intelligent whose cowardly fear is fueled by this hate propaganda. This is especially true among the population of Ukraine and in the Western states, particularly in Germany, where the young population, even minors, are coming out as warmongers as a result of hatred for Russia and Germany's misguided leadership. Since all the blame is being placed on the Russians, because the ruling Nazi idiots of Europe, especially the EU dictatorship in Germany, constantly maliciously pick on Russia and refuse to acknowledge the truth that Zelensky is the idiot who is actually the root cause of this damned war, because he wanted to bring the Ukraine, which is extremely corrupt, into the murderous organization NATO. For the sake of dying, he wanted to bring Ukraine, which is extremely contaminated by corruption, into the murderous organization NATO. He, who is probably one of the greatest hypocrites, beggars, power-hungry and warmongers, as well as one of the most corrupt in his own country. Zelensky's NATO accession mania was naturally picked up by the senile President Bilden, who was ruling the USA at the time, and who stuck his dirty fingers into Zelensky's NATO accession bid, and did so for so long that Putin finally lost his temper and attacked Ukraine with Russia's murderous organization. This was, of course, also wrong, and therefore, Putin's actions must be met with clear and very harsh intervention, because war is never a means of achieving justice. Because war only creates ever greater enmity, and ever more discord, also death, misery, hardship, and destruction. However, this is something that the Nazi-minded idiots in the European government, who are biasedly stuffing the warmonger Zelensky with weapons and money, do not understand. The fact that journalism is playing a dirty and biased role in all this, namely that it is only producing propaganda for Zelensky and his smear campaign, and the corruption-ridden Ukraine, and the damage, etc., caused by the Russian army, while concealing all the damage, deaths and destruction, etc., is deliberately hushed up. The fact that the whole thing is even worse than being straw lowly intelligent stupidity is due to the fact that the guilty European leaders are so idiotic and stupid that, with their stupid Nazi mentality, as the idiotic governments of Europe pompously interfere in this war, even though the whole war theater is none of their business and their idiotic actions only create enmity. This is particularly evident in the fact that they are supplying unreasonable and insane amounts of weapons and money to the warmonger Zelensky and Ukraine, which, on the one hand, makes America also very happy, and on the other hand, of course, allows Zelensky to beg the European government idiots in every possible way for weapons, money, and assistance in every possible way. Not only does this allow the war to continue, but it also allows the corrupt Zelensky and co. to also continue enriching themselves. The situation is similar with the mass murderer Netanyahu in Israel, who can only continue because he is supplied with weapons and money, and can therefore continue his desired genocide, and ultimately take over the entire Middle East with his murderous organization, and terrorize the whole of Arabia, as you, Brahmanda, have fathomed in his subconscious, as you said. But then there is also the mad dictator Trump in America, who is just as mad as all the Nazi hangers-on in Europe, who can all do whatever they want without being stopped in their lousy craft.
What I also discovered about this man Trump was that he does not even have control over his own lies, and therefore contradicts himself. Which is very unfortunate, as his supporters allow themselves to be taken for a ride by him, as you say, and are so narrow-minded that they do not realize what this man's actual negative attitude really is, as he will soon be working with the thoroughly degenerate and malicious Netanyahu to launch another treacherous attack on the state of Iran. Everything with the aircraft carriers and warships in the Gulf waters is just a distraction from what is being planned behind the scenes, with the Israeli war fanatic Netanyahu to once again treacherously invade Iran, whereupon Lebanon will also be confronted with war again shortly afterwards. As I realized, Trump is striving for world domination as world president, which is much more than he freely reveals with his behavior and talk, while Netanyahu.
Yes, I know. You have already explained that to me in detail. But as far as Trump is concerned, in my opinion, he is a nasty, loud-mouthed, domineering, brainless, unpredictable and dangerous good-for-nothing who will plunge the whole world into misery, hardship and even war. But his supporters fail to recognize this, and idiotically continue to support him, and let him carry on unchallenged. And if he is not stopped, he will actually achieve his megalomaniacal ambitions, and become a world dictator, leaving countless corpses in his wake. And what he will do in the near future with Netanyahu because of Persia or Iran, in order to spread more mischief, as you say, was to be expected, because in both of these individuals I recognize only extreme evil, falsehood and low intelligence instead of anything of value. Therefore both of these empty-headed murderers, Trump and Netanyahu, are unable to recognize and understand the havoc they are wreaking throughout the world, with their delusions of grandeur and power, bringing misery and hardship upon humanity. Trump, who has sunk into utter low intelligence, is unable to recognize Netanyahu's deceitfulness, that he's exploiting it to his advantage and deceiving Trump with lies and deceit, thereby enabling him to realize his secret personal plans, which are based on the genocide of the Arab peoples. So what Netanyahu fundamentally strives for, and wants in his pathological genocidal mania, is not recognized by the fool Trump, namely, that if the two of them attack Persia or Iran, again, land after land can be slowly but steadily taken over by his murderous organization, whereby he will cunningly lure Persia or Iran into a new attack, causing them to wage war against the Gulf states and make enemies of them. This gives Netanyahu advantages, and the empty-headed dictator Trump will help him in this, because he has low intelligence and does not recognize what this Israeli Hitler is actually up to. And if I resort to the comparison with Hitler, then it is not only Netanyahu who is like Hitler, but also the American dictator Trump, and the corrupt Zelensky, who is obsessed with a mad war mania. All of them can effectively be judged as Hitler-like, in a certain way, just in a different way. But those in European governments who share the Nazi mindset also support the corrupt war fanatic Zelensky with weapons, ammunition, money, and other aid. This is while these idiots, through their insane and mendacious hate propaganda against Russia, are portraying it as the enemy of the world and ultimately forcing it to defend itself. That is a fact, but it should also be said and explained that none of this is any excuse for Putin and his murderous organization invading Ukraine with a war that has now been going on for 4 years, and that is the fault of all those Nazi sympathizers in the governments of Europe and America who have supplied weapons, ammunition and other war material, as well as vast amounts of money, to Zelensky, and continued to do so, so that this corrupt warmonger can enrich himself more and more, and also continue the war in full force, and carry on and on. And the fact that first-class idiots also supply weapons, etc., to Israel is the last straw. Furthermore, I would like to add, as you, Bermuda, is that the entire corrupt pack in Ukraine, along with the mentally ill idiots of the Nazi-minded Western governments, are trying to demonize their own Ukrainian population through evil hate propaganda against Russia, and thereby demonize and more than just maliciously denigrate the Russian people, even though they themselves are not responsible for the war raging in Ukraine, which was triggered by Putin, because Zelensky and the then US President Biden harped on about Putin for so long that NATO should be brought into Ukraine, until Putin switched off and let the war break out. But back to America's idiot dictator, because this morally depraved individual is supported and cheered on by other idiots who are equally deluded, stupid and completely insane, also by other supporters from the majority of his own party and brainless sections of the population, who are just as twisted as he is. Consequently, there is no sign of reason or peacefulness to be found in these sick minds. Only discord, strife, hatred, and warlike sentiments. Consequently, dictator Trump can do whatever he wants without being reined in, let alone removed from office. And if he ever gets a slap on the wrist from the Supreme Court, it will be so minimal that he will just laugh it off and continue in the same old style, as evidenced by the tariffs, since his criminal actions are not being punished, nor are they in the Epstein affair, the full disclosure of which he is suppressing. Consequently, in the Epstein case, everything concerning him is simply blacked out, because he controls everything and decides what can and cannot be released, as U. Brahmanda said weeks ago.
There are reports of a little over 1,000 or more people involved, but these are just figures I have heard in passing, because I am not concerned with these more than primitive occurrences, which you already explored with my grandfather's Svath as a boy in the 1940s, along with many other things that will happen in the future, but which have already come true several times and will continue to do so. And what you said about the sign of the times?
Yes. Some things will still come to pass in that regard, namely what will happen in the future. Besides, the Zeitzeichen is not written by me, because I usually compile it from various newspaper articles, for which we have obtained permission for further use from reasonable editorial offices or article writers. The articles are compiled by Occam, Bernadette, and me, and sometimes also by someone else, but that is rare, because I insist that the necessary permission be obtained, or the media refuse to allow further use.
Since the media are always mentioned in the articles, it would be good publicity for them if you publish their material.
That's true, but apparently there is a false greed for profit behind these media, so they do not realize that they can benefit from my reuse of their articles. The whole thing, I mean the Zeitzeichen, which is full of interesting articles, is published every month on the FIGU website, 3 to 4 times a month, with new articles that are really very interesting and informative. So when I produce the Zeitzeichen, I am not stealing the articles, but have permission from the media outlets concerned for each individual article.
I think that's good, because all the effort that goes into this work is really valuable. Because the articles you use for the Zeitzeichen are by authors and media that are usually only distributed locally. However, I have thoroughly checked that your Zeitzeichen are accessed by German readers around the earth, also by persons who translate your Zeitzeichen into their languages using computer programs. That is all I want to say on this subject. I would also like to explain that, with regard to the President of the United States and his contacts with Epstein, which you mentioned earlier, I would like to explain that this deceitful and hypocritical liar, who wants to clear his name through insolence and perjury, because he...
I will not write down what you have just said when Quetzal dictates the entire conversation to me, because I could get into serious trouble if a lawsuit were filed against me, as Earthlings frantically resist having their secrets revealed. They immediately resort to defamation suits, which are settled in court and, as I know from my own experience, are decided in favor of the plaintiffs. This has cost me a lot of money in 4 cases. In 3 of the cases at least, the court costs amounted to almost 15,000 Swiss francs, and a court injunction prohibiting me from ever mentioning anything about it in the future, which means that the American, who has been living in Germany since then, can continue to use my stolen material for his own self-aggrandizement with impunity. The Frenchman, who initially lived in the French-speaking part of Switzerland, also did the same, as did the Canadian doctor, who claimed to be married to Semuse, but who was since deceased. The reason was simply that because I myself wrote to these individuals to protest against their misuse of my truthful material through lies and deceit, when I wanted to set the record straight and tell them to stop lying, politely and without fuss. But because of this, all 3 of them sued me for defamation, and I ended up losing the case. In the 4th case, I was ordered by the court to pay 85,000 Swiss francs as a result of lies and defamation, because I do not want to say any more about this, also not even though they wanted to destroy me and make a fool of me. and used lies, deceit, and slander in court to portray me as something I am not, in order to exploit me, because I am not vindictive. Besides, I believe that even if a human being has done something evil and wrong, you should not maliciously insult or humiliate them for it. Even as a little boy, I learned from my mother and father, and also from Svath, that such things should never be done, because they only create enmity, discord, and hatred.
That is indeed the case. However, what you said earlier could really be true, that you would be summoned to court again, so it is probably better that I omit Bermunda's mention when dictating the conversation, as well as your explanation regarding the 85,000 francs. We all know why you had to pay this amount unlawfully as a result of lies and slander about 30 years ago.
Yes, that is what I know. You and Pact advised me, when I was unjustly convicted, that I should pay anyway, because, as you had ascertained, the lies and slander would be perpetuated, leaving me with no chance and forcing me to pay even more.
That was indeed the case. It was good for you that you stuck to it.
I had no other choice, and on the other hand, I did not want to take the chance that what you had figured out would come true.
You often use the word idiot when you refer to certain machinations and leadership styles of state leaders or the actions of private individuals. You once told me what this term means, but through personal research I have realized that it is interpreted differently among Earth humans. Can you explain once again what this term basically means?
I certainly can. An idiot is a human being who is peculiar, strange, and therefore unique, as can be seen from the ancient Greek word idios, as I have already explained before. So when I refer to certain human beings as idiots, I am referring to human beings who, in my view, are incapable of clear and rational thinking, decision-making, and acting, which has absolutely nothing to do with what is mistakenly understood as mental illness and the like. My words are also not intended to be humiliating, because I learned from my mother, father, and Svath that a human being should never be humiliated, but that such a human being should also never, for any reason whatsoever, bow down to another human being in humility. This is because a human being should never simply believe something, but must recognize reality and its truth through their own thinking, searching and exploring, and through their own experience. Only then will the human being be able to recognize and understand themselves, and consequently recognize incorrect facts and independently change them for the good through understanding and reason, or rather, be able to remedy them themselves. Specifically, the term idiot is actually to be understood as idiochromatic, which means that the whole of idiocy is actually not rational, that is to say, a view and attitude without reason, completely meaningless and therefore contrary to reason. Nowadays, idiocy is also considered insane, and thus an impaired state of unreasonableness and wrongful actions and behavior, as well as an impaired state of consciousness. In the worst case, however, insanity is also defined as madness and complete disturbance of consciousness. According to the ancient Greek meaning, however, idiocy also corresponds to absurdity, nonsense, and madness, and thus to thoughtlessness and absolute unreasonableness. Nowadays, in popular understanding, the word idiot is unfortunately actually a swear word and is also interpreted as a lowly intelligent human being, although low intelligence has since ancient times correctly meant nothing other than not thinking. But this has long been forgotten and distorted in modern usage, as also the term idiot, which today is used to describe someone who is mentally deficient, limited, stupid, or not up to scratch, thick as a brick, brainless, empty-headed, or feeble-minded, not very bright, stupid, very unintelligent, or stupid.
Thank you for your detailed explanation.
You are welcome, and that also makes it clear that I do not see the Nazi idiots as mentally ill, but as completely uneducated and incapable of understanding and reasoning. Idiots who are unable to think, decide, and act in accordance with reality and truth. They are believers and pseudo-thinkers, and therefore, biased and absolutely, and completely unfit for government office. Therefore, They also mistakenly believe in every way that the murderous organization called the Army, which is armed by their country for outrageous, horrendous sums of money, and must be rearmed again and again, is the most important thing for maintaining supposed peace or fighting in a crazy war, etc. In this way, all the idiots promote war, by which I mean the real Nazi-minded people in the governments, also the rabid dictators of the murderous organizations, who do not promote peace in their attitudes, but fear, cowardice, fighting, G-Vault, and lack of freedom. For it is they who are driving technical development in such a wise that practically every new invention can be exploited for the benefit of murderous organizations or for other murderous purposes, also private ones. Even an open paperclip has been used to murder human beings, namely by, and as a result, human beings, without it being possible to ascertain why. This method has also been used since ancient times to murder human beings with poisoned needles, etc., which could not be detected because the punctures and the fatal poisonings, and therefore went unrecognized. So-called ear sticks were also prepared with deadly poison and used to injure people, thereby introducing the poison into the body, so that the murder was not detected. Such murder practices are still in use today worldwide for many reasons, and are practiced, especially when it comes to inheritances, hatred, or the removal of inconvenient persons. However, this is not usually recognized, which is why various deaths are assumed to be normal. The same thing happened with sewing needles and safety pins, etc. And the fact that such practices were carried out by private individuals even in ancient times is ignored by all historical media and also by the courts, because they did not acquire this knowledge, because they simply had no knowledge of it. Now, instead of doing the correct thing with regard to evolution, the development of technology is simply being driven forward, and as I said, mainly for the purpose of arming the most modern murderers, the military. Technology has already advanced to such an extent that murderous machines and robots, as well as artificial intelligence, and already all-dominant electronics, are determining wars, and discord is spreading more and more in all countries around the world. This is being driven forward by the American dictator Trump, who can pursue his hegemonic ambitions with impunity and do whatever he wants without being stopped for his malicious dictatorial practices, which his party and his supporters among the people enthusiastically endorse and help to promote. Technological development and artificial intelligence, as I predicted back in the 1940s because Foth and I saw this in the future, is the current path of devolution for humanity on Earth, which will bring great disaster upon them. The first step has already been taken, and AI, by misleading the entire overpopulated world, has begun to maneuver it into misery and drag it into something over which humanity will lose all control. And this will inevitably happen sooner or later. Instead of Earth humans following the correct path of evolution, namely to urgently develop their physical state of consciousness and their subconscious to a higher level in order to become true human beings, whose endeavor is to be true peace, true life, true love, true knowledge and true attention to and observance of all the naturalness of the creation and nature, it consistently acts contrary to what is its destiny, according to creation. The majority of humanity vehemently roars and screams for hatred, revenge, retribution, discord, war, annihilation and extermination, for destruction, ruin, and doom. As a result of greed for money, the planet and nature are being destroyed, and fauna and flora are being partially exterminated, slowly but surely turning the world into hell for all life. The evolution of the consciousness and subconsciousness of Earth humans takes precedence over all inventions, rather than technological inventions, which, according to the mindset of Earthlings, are always used to a large extent for the war mania of murderous military organizations.
Then I must go now, for you know my duty.
Of course, I do not want to hold you back when you have your duty to perform. Time passes quickly, so we will surely see each other again soon. Go now, and goodbye.
Goodbye, dear friend.
Take care. See you again.
Then I would now like to talk about Switzerland's neutrality, because it was recently discussed and clarified in the committee after a thorough and truly in-depth clarification, because you often speak of the incorrect exercise and abuse of Swiss neutrality. Therefore, it was discussed in the entire committee, and it was determined and clarified what we Plejaren and all peoples of the entire Federation understood by this when almost 53,000 years ago. According to Earth time, we Plejaren and all the peoples of our Federation decided on comprehensive peace and freedom. Since then, all those involved have maintained this, and it has been called the Uniform Peace Pact in our language, which has been observed without any deviations or incidents since then. We did not know the term neutrality, but it has now been introduced into our language and into all languages of the Federation peoples, in accordance with what we have ascertained regarding this term. The irrefutable result is that neutrality means that it is all-encompassing and such that no deviations of any kind are permissible. Consequently, the entire committee of over 1.5 million persons agrees with what you understand and represent in terms of neutrality in an intellectual and rational manner. If sanctions imposed by other countries are adopted by Switzerland and applied against other states, regardless of whether this is done by the federal government, companies, organizations, or private individuals, then this is treason and is a very serious violation of Switzerland's neutrality, because true neutrality in any form does not allow such actions in any way whatsoever. Neutrality encompasses everything and anything in any way that contradicts even the slightest interference in the affairs of foreign states that are in a state of war or otherwise engaged in armed conflict. Neutrality also does not permit peace negotiations or peace consultations to be conducted in any way, because this alone can give rise to hostility, which can arise as a result of misunderstanding or failure to understand the mediation efforts, etc.
These are arguments that I myself have always considered and experienced when I unexpectedly found myself in disputes that I was supposed to mediate, but which I always refused to do. That alone was not good, and as a result, I was verbally abused, and even threatened. But to talk about that further would be like carrying water to the Rhine. So it is certainly better to let you read this article I wrote. Here, this is it.
What? Yes, I see that interests me.
Unity, wholeness.
A unity, or a whole, consists without exception of two factors, namely the negative factor and the positive factor, which together or combined result in a unity or a whole. A unity or a whole is absolutely inseparable and fused with a negative and a positive factor. Consequently, there has also never been anything inseparable. There is nothing inseparable, and there will never be anything inseparable. Accordingly, it follows in every case that both the negative and the positive are also only one factor, but never a unit or a whole, and remain variable and changeable in themselves. Thus, the negative and positive can be weakened or strengthened in their own value, or become more powerful or less powerful. This means that negative and positive can be expressed more strongly or more weakly in their application and effect, or more energetically powerfully, or conversely, less energetically powerfully. For example, a tantrum, which is negative in nature, can be stronger or weaker, while a positive aspect, such as courage, can weaken to despondency or increase to overconfidence. This should be explained in order to be correctly understood. Negative and positive are each a factor that together form what determines whether a unity or a whole is formed in a negative or positive way, because through the formation and predominance of either the negative or the positive, the unity or the whole is then formed accordingly. The whole is formed accordingly. The unity or whole of the human being is the self-educated absolute nature or form of their character, which is arranged in the brain and fundamentally forms their personality and determines their decisions, as well as controlling their social interactions and behavior. The character, in which all personality traits are actually stored, exercises impulse control over how and in what way the human being reacts negatively or positively, depending on how he has shaped and programmed it through his self-education. The character is also responsible for processing the feelings arising from the world of thoughts and the emotions resulting from them in a negative or positive way, depending on how it has been shaped by self-education and is accordingly characterized. Ultimately, this also shapes the mind, as well as social skills or inabilities, etc. However, the factors of negative and positive are always responsible for all effects arising from character, always, and in every case, and according to how negatively or positively character has been shaped by self-education. When the human being applies what has been formed in their character and brings it into a certain context with effects, depending on the nature of the factor, that is to say negative or positive, this can result in something very good and valuable, but on the other hand, also in something bad and very worthless. In any case, this is always and without exception the absolutely decisive circumstance that arises in a certain direction, which is formed according to the factor which is brought to bear, that is to say negative or positive, and through which the unity or the whole results accordingly. In this regard, a factor is actually only a mediator which, in short, is a guide according to its nature, as negative or positive, the source of right or wrong, good or bad, to which the human being commits himself according to his will, and which brings him peace or discord, happiness or unhappiness, good or bad. Good or bad. So for human beings, their negative and positive factors are the absolutely decisive elements or components or factors for what ultimately constitutes the effective value of their character, which embodies them as human beings and as personal units or wholes. Together or combined, and according to their usefulness, negative or positive, the two factors, negative and positive, form the effective educational value of the unity or whole of the human being. This unity or whole is the end product or the result of what the human being develops through self-education from the negative and positive factors, and thereby forms his character. If he develops this through self-education in a positive-wise way, then it follows that he strives for a very valuable unity, his whole, and becomes a positive, honest, righteous and upright person with a strong character. But if they approach things in a negative way, or also only half-heartedly, and do not do what is right, then their character becomes lousy, full of vices, and Ausartungen. They would become an insincere, dishonest, deceitful, untruthful, self-constructed Wesen, who, when the opportunity arises, will become quick-tempered, deceitful, lying, domineering, angry, selfish, know-it-all, self-important, violent and evil, etc., as individual factors, negative and positive form, depending on their values and disvalues, which the human being creates according to his way of thinking, considering, feeling and striving the good and balanced nature of the unity, or the whole, or their neutral balance. However, if the negative or positive factors are misused, this results in corresponding negative or positive Ausartungen, which naturally put a strain on the unity or the whole. Therefore, every factor, whether negative or positive, is always very decisive, essential, determining and decisive for how unity, or the whole, is formed, whether it is balanced, neutral, subject to Ausartung, burdened, or damaged. The factors of unity, or the whole, are negative or positive according to their nature, but they are innumerably changeable in themselves, and therefore not a unity or a whole, but changeable. Consequently, they form the decisive circumstance for shaping the value of the unity of the whole, according to their nature, that is to say through Ausartung negative, through Ausartung positive, but in a correct way, absolutely balanced neutral. Accordingly, when the human being considers their unity or wholeness in relation to their character, they shape it either negatively or positively through its factors, but they can also shape it in a balanced and neutral way through their thoughts and clear reasoning, reflection, and striving, as well as through self-education. The human being is absolutely capable of creating very specific attitudes and character behaviors in a good or bad way, as well as in a so-called normal or degenerate negative or positive form. This can be through positive or negative emotionality, for example, but this can also lead to the development of reliability and compatibility, as well as to conventionality in some areas, to positive words or negative words, as well as to unusual perceptions of reality and proper behavioral norms, etc. Through their efforts, human beings can also develop into normal and valuable personalities who are far removed from any hierarchical power struggles and are completely open and possess positive personality traits, as well as fundamentally valuable dimensions. These include conscientiousness, openness to experiences, as well as extroversion, or an open personality that also gains energy from social contacts and from actions in the environment. In addition, this personality embodies joy through its sociability and is constantly active and inclined towards compatibility, talkative and adventurous, as well as open. Semyaze Silver Star Center, 22nd February 2026, 13:35 hours Billy.
That is explained really clearly.
Of course, there would be much more to explain, but at some point and somewhere, a line has to be drawn, because every human being should still think for themselves and not simply cram everything into themselves, in the form of a belief, and thus become a believer, who then only exercises pseudo-thinking and is practically untruthful in their knowledge.
What you say is indeed true. But now, Edward, my friend, I must return to my duties. If you have nothing more important to say or ask.
No, I have not.
Then, Edward, goodbye.
So be it. Until next time.